Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 27th of September 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Scott. David, of course, reporting from north of the border with northern exposure. Well, today, a special edition news focusing on Brexit and really the state of the country. And first of all, let's have a little look about what people are saying about what's happening. This very interesting one here. We've got the key headline, "How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood." And we've got a picture of the Supreme Court with quite a rude little expression, top left. But obviously somebody deeply unhappy at the decision made by these individuals.
It's enjoyable to see Greta being quoted.
Yeah, a bit of humour, black humour coming in here, but it shows a bit of passion. So we're going to say, well done for being upfront. But what caused this lady to respond in this way? Well, this is the dark reality. We've got Robert Buckland, QC MP, who said this: "We must all remember that our world-class judiciary always acts free from political motivation or influence, and that the rule of law is the basis of our democracy for all seasons. Personal attacks on judges from any quarter are completely unacceptable." So that's the sort of arrogant, self-righteous comments that's been coming out of Parliament for some time now, which of course is producing the backlash. You picked up on "all seasons," Mike, I think, has been a quote from somewhere.
Well, it's invoking the name of someone whose name's completely escaped me because we're live, but there you go.
Caught you out on that one. Well, there's a little bit of theatrical in the "for all seasons" there, but personal attacks on judges from any quarter are completely unacceptable. David, what's your response to this? It's a pretty incredible claim.
Maybe you could remind me who the man for all seasons is while you're at it.
Yeah, Thomas Moore.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was that little picture I saw it put out by James Delingpole on the morning of the decision from the Supreme Court, and yes, it was very funny. But also on that morning, I've never seen social media so angry. I mean, just so livid at what they'd done. It was everywhere. And it was visceral rage to start with. It's maybe changed a bit now. People have a chance to calm down. But yes, we need to get into the detail of this and the detail of the judgment. And there are many things to discuss.
Indeed. Well, before we get there, let's have a little bit look at a little bit more of the type of material circulating at the moment. So we've got this. This is a letter that was sent to the Times by Professor Meg Russell. She's director of the Constitution Unit at UCL. And she said Lord Sumption's words defending the Supreme Court decision were powerful and important. As a former Supreme Court Justice himself, but one whose 2019 Wreath lectures remain lamented, the decline of politics and the rise of law to fill the void, Lord Sumption is no fan of judicial overreach, as he emphasised the British tradition is to be governed by politics, not judges, but politics cannot operate if our central body, Parliament, is shut down. We should reflect on how we've sunk so low that judges must intervene to defend Parliament against the actions of a Prime Minister. Anti-political sentiment and lambasting of politicians have long been routine, but herein lie the seeds of corrosive populism. Meanwhile, the alternatives to politics are much, much worse. We now badly need an organised movement to defend politics itself. Short-term, a vicious Johnson-led People versus Parliament election should be avoided at all costs. And I was just interested that if you take a look at this lady, Meg Russell, she's working with UK in a changing Europe. She's just had a fellowship award. I did call them this morning to see whether that meant she was being paid in any form. They weren't able to tell me, but we'll follow up on that. But of course, Britain's universities are awash in European money and pro-European sentiment, and UCL's not immune from that.
Well, we should just mention that UCL, of course, has the Constitution Unit, Brian, which I have to say seems to me works very hard to push forward with constitutional change rather than trying to reinforce the constitution we've got.
Indeed. And I'm just having a look at my screen to see the next one, because this one is also very interesting. You'll have to pause your screen to read it because the print's quite small. Really excellent email sent to me. This is a copy of an email sent to Dame Eleanor, who's Deputy Chairman of the House. And somebody's quoting volume 49 of the Journals of the House of Commons, 1783, page 663, which is talking about our constitution, sovereign, legislative and judicial powers are the rights of the people. And then it goes through until it says that basically if this is not working, then the right and the bounden duty of the people is to punish all traitors against the nation. So here we've got a different approach by somebody. They are quoting the Constitution, constitutional documents and information back at the seat of power themselves. I'm actually going to say I think both approaches, black humour and this kind of research, very powerful. So we're going to say well done.
Now, I have to say that watching Parliament on Wednesday, this was the first day back and so on. And Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General, was the main speaker in the morning session. And he was probably the most important section of what happened that day. The rest of it was nonsense, because he was being asked some pretty specific questions, David, about the Supreme Court decision and so on. I think we'll start first of all with this, because this is Geoffrey Cox's response to a question about what would have happened in the past had this new law, as he described it, been the standard with regards to previous prorogations. So let's start here, and we'll talk our way through this.
As to my honourable friend's first question, plainly, if one re-examines the historical records, there is no doubt that there would have been some, possibly quite a few prorogations that under this test might have had difficulty in passing. For example, Ramsay MacDonald prorogued this Parliament in 1930 for some months during the course of a minority government, at a time when the Great Wall Street crash had happened in 1929, and when I've no doubt that some would say the House should have sat to determine the onset of the Great Depression and to debate those important matters. But the courts looked on. They looked on impassively as that Labour government decided to prorogue. And again in 1948, and right up into the 1990s, when it was said that a Parliament had been prorogued in order to avoid an embarrassing Select Committee inquiry. And from now on, when a Prime Minister has to prorogue Parliament, he'll have to look at all the Select Committees and see what inquiries they're doing, and which chairman of which Select Committee might say, in a mortally wounded and offended manner, why to prorogue and not to allow my Select Committee to report is a matter of public importance, which I'll go to court and stop the prorogation for. So I do think that this test set by the Supreme Court invites quite a number of significant questions. I do.
It does indeed, David. So let's start with that. It invites some questions, and we now have the situation where constitutionally the government of the day can't call an election because of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, and now because of this intervention from the Supreme Court, they can't prorogue, so we are left in a position where governments cannot govern.
Governments cannot govern, and we cannot escape from a parliament that no longer represents the people. It's a kind of parliamentary dictatorship. Very interesting. Geoffrey Cox was excellent, and I think he made the point extremely effectively that this is new law. We'll get to the detail of this in a little while, but this is entirely different from what's gone in the past. Apparently, Rees-Mogg cabinet called it a constitutional coup. If you put it strongly as that may be, but it's certainly different. It's certainly a break from the past. This is certainly something that the Supreme Court made up out of whole cloth. Yes. So let's look at your next clip and we'll pick up more.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move to the Supreme Court itself and the test that he's talking about.
The second question, therefore, is what are the limits to that power? Two fundamental principles of our Constitution are relevant to deciding that question. The first is parliamentary sovereignty, that Parliament can make laws which everyone must obey. The second fundamental principle is parliamentary accountability. In the words of Lord Bingham, senior law lord, quote, "The conduct of government by a Prime Minister and Cabinet, collectively responsible and accountable to Parliament, lies at the heart of Westminster democracy."
Is that how you see it?
Not quite. Right. From the outset here. Parliamentary sovereignty. Now, this is new and this is quite frightening. Lady Hale defined it as Parliament is able to make laws which everyone must obey. A few things. Lady Hale, her knowledge of Scots law is so delinquent that she once said that Scotland doesn't have the common law, and when corrected by a Scots judge that Scots law is founded on the common law, she said, "I blush." So she probably doesn't realise that it's at least explicit in Scotland and implicit in England that sovereignty comes from the people and lies with the people. And Parliament is not sovereign, and Parliament cannot control people. Now, examples of this are jury nullification, which is throughout all common law jurisdictions a recognised thing, that juries can look at a law from Parliament and say, "No, you're not on. We strike that down." Jury nullification is real. So that would mean Parliament's not sovereign. That would mean the people, in the form of a jury, is. So that's interesting. So that seems to me to be wrong. And there's another issue here as well. You've got everyone must obey. Really? So these people turn around and write something into law, whatever it is, that changes the law. Yesterday's not the same as the law today, and everyone must obey. Says who? They're not writing laws, they're writing statutes. The Freeman movement in Canada pointed out that confusing statute and law is gross negligence, which is the equivalent of fraud. And that's what the Supreme Court seemed to do there. Because what a statute is a written rule of society given the force of law. And what society is people gathered together by consent to achieve some common aim. Now, I'm a member of many societies, a lot of engineering societies, and I'm bound by their rules, and I pay them money. And I do all of these things because I have voluntarily joined that society. You cannot coerce a free person to join a society. It requires consent. And what she's saying is, no, it's absolute. I think that we had a war about that some time ago, as Mike was saying. And then we get to the whole accountability issue. It's not, Parliament's not holding the government to account, it's holding the government captive. It's a bizarre scenario that we're watching.
This issue of consent, of course, has been right at the heart of constitutional argument for a very long time. And some people take the view that consent is given on an individual basis, others that it's given collectively. But whatever your definition of consent is, that consent, as you say, comes from people, not from, it's not given by default as a result of an election being held every several years. It's something which is living as time goes on. But I mean, it's something which is being subverted in every area. Policing, for example, increasingly is not by consent because the police are behaving like thugs. So people have got to get to grips with this concept of consent and really fight to maintain it.
Well, this is right. I mean, what's the word that the Scottish government couldn't use over named persons? Consent. And if we are free, if we're free individuals, if we're free sovereign individuals in that you own yourself, you direct your own path, then that doesn't give you the right to harm another person, but it doesn't give anyone else the right to literally lord it over you if you don't consent. Now, how the consent is actually manufactured and to what degree it's done so openly and honestly is a minefield. I mean, we might talk about it later, but trying to figure out, I've had many suggestions as to what consent is and what designates consent, including things like having a pension and signing up for the electoral roll. That means you're consenting to the entire system. Now, if that's the case, it's not informed consent because no one's saying this. So where the consent is taken from is a mystery at the moment.
Okay, well, look, I want to move on to this, one of the other issues you raised there, which was the issue of the difference between statute and law. Lady Hill, as you say, confusing what statute is, perhaps, in what she said there. But let's go back to Geoffrey Cox. I want to get your thoughts on this.
What it is a new principle of law which has been found to exist by the Supreme Court, and where hitherto it has not been thought that a court could go. But that is, the court is entitled to develop the common law, and that it has done. It does set a precedent. It is binding, unless this House, in due course, should consider it should take action to alter that position.
Caroline Lake.
So the court has the right to change the common law, David?
Yes, that's quite a worrying concept as well, because it's meant to be juries that do that develop the common law, and not judges. Although you quite often find reference to judge-made law when judges are speaking or lawyers are speaking. So it's the common law and a new idea in common law to get this judgment. So there is no statute currently that's playing any part, and yet the justification is that we need Parliament in there in order to create statutes. It seems a slightly contrived piece of reasoning to me.
Yes, I should say that one of the questions that was asked later on was would it be possible for a future Parliament to legislate to change that situation, this test, back to the way it was before? I wasn't sure that Geoffrey Cox gave a terribly clear answer on that, but perhaps it should be.
Well, there was people standing up in Parliament that day talking about Parliament being supreme, the pinnacle of our constitution. I thought that was in fact Her Majesty the Queen, but there we go. They were talking about looking again at the whole function and indeed existence of the Supreme Court. I mean, this might be the Supreme Court's suicide moment, because they're only there because Tony Blair put them there. Although it's a very grand title, they are not supreme. And it was part of the vandalism of the Constitution that was carried out by the Blair government, who wanted to change everything and create chaos. And it's now working its way out. They might not last very much longer. We'll see.
Yeah.
I think I'd just add to that, David. Well, are they creating chaos? They certainly are, put in place by Tony Blair. But of course, one of their key tasks was over the devolution issue, which was itself absolutely pro-European political policy. So if we go back through this group of individuals, and as we're going to see in a minute, their continued, their parent organisations' continued links with the EU, they are by no means impartial.
Now, there's been a lot said over the last couple of days about language and the language that's being used by politicians, by members of the public, and so on. Well, Amber Rudd brought this up during the debate with Geoffrey Cox. Well, as David hinted at a few seconds ago, no question, she invoking the Civil War here.
Rudd.
Mr. Speaker, I must raise my concerns about the Attorney General constantly saying that this Parliament is dead. This Parliament was elected in 2017. It reflects the divisions in this country, the divisions in our communities and the divisions in our families. The failure is that we have not yet reached a compromise. Many of us long to leave the European Union, as we set out in the referendum, but are frustrated by the fact that we have not been able to find a consensus amongst the different factions. Can I urge the Attorney General to work with colleagues to try and find that compromise and to cease this language of pitting Parliament against the people?
I assure my right honourable friend that if I hadn't been driven to this language, I would never have used it. The fact is, the fact of the matter is that the opposition won't let the government govern. The opposition won't do what the opposition should do in these circumstances, which is vote for an election. By any standards, the government is in a minority. It's having the order paper taken over from it again and again, and no doubt further attempts to come. And that is the very definition of a Parliament that won't fulfil its responsibilities, either to let the Queen's government to be able to be conducted or to opt for a general election. That is why I call this a dead Parliament, and I do so advisedly. And I know my right honourable friend knows. Nobody worked harder than I for compromise. Nobody worked harder than I did for compromise. Nobody worked harder than I did to put through the withdrawal agreement that was put before this House. I and she worked hard to put this through, but I've now reached a sad and heavy conclusion that this Parliament's no longer worth sitting or worth the candle, and it should be gone for any good it's doing.
I have to say, you know, Amber Rudd starts off with divisions in the family, divisions in communities. This is, thinking back to primary school days, this is exactly how the English Civil War is introduced to people, that are divided families and divided communities and all this kind of stuff. And then he's talking about the need to get rid of this dead Parliament, which is very reminiscent of the Rump Parliament. I appreciate the Rump Parliament came after the Civil War was fought, but nonetheless, it's invoking very emotive language and emotive history. And it seems to me that it's maybe not designed, but it can the only outcome from that can be a more wound up population in the country.
Yeah, indeed. The other thing, Mike, is you look at these people, we can clearly see politicians now wandering around. They haven't got a clue what's going on. They don't understand who is actually driving policy in the country. They don't understand what's happening around them. So they are also extremely vulnerable. Some of them are in the mix. They are working behind the scenes to help break this country down, because that's my opinion as the objective. But the rest of them are now wandering around like lambs for the slaughter because they haven't got a clue who is actually driving the system. And they need to be given a big jolt in order to wake them up. David, we are in a very dangerous position. I remember watching Johnny English, that wonderful spoof film on James Bond, and at one stage the French king is watching a cartoon, and in the cartoon England is shown as a grey little island off the coast of the all-powerful European continent, and he says, I will make that horrible little island into a prison camp, and a barbed wire fence goes around the island, and I will dump all of my prisoners and trash. And then you see the cartoon image of of scruffy, ill-fed prisoners and rubbish being dumped on UK. I always remember watching that little clip. There was something about it which I found a little bit unnerving. I think the agenda is to completely destroy this country, leave it parked on the edge of Europe so that the great EU project can continue. Whether I'm correct or not, what do you think?
Well, far be it for the dour Scottish guy to introduce a note of optimism. I don't see it quite like that. The attack on the country has been going on for decades, and it's been to demoralize and remove everything that we ever believed in and destroy everything from the family up that binds us together. And a lot of the attack is going on via language and how things are said and how things are made unthinkable and certainly unsayable. And it's kind of getting reversed. And I think it's now got so obvious and it's so clear that the people are being abused by the leaders that there is not just anger, but there's genuine fight back. And the worse the oppression gets, the more the British are remembering who we are and, you know, what we bring to the world and what we're for, that there's a point to us. Now, this thing, people versus Parliament. So Amber Rudd stood up and said, we don't want to have this terrible people versus Parliament. Okay. What's been happening is anyone who stood up for the country, and Mike's commented on this, particularly with respect to England. Anyone who stands up and says, I'm proud to be English, gets called a Nazi and a fascist, right? That's to silence them. That's to say, you can't be proud of England, you must be ashamed. That's to change how these people think. It's to create a reality. Now, what's happening, I think, is these people are starting to say, well, hang on a minute, we'll do this to you. You call us that? Well, we'll come back with something. You're a traitor. You're surrendering. Or the Parliament is against the people. What then happens is the accusation that's closest to the truth wins. Which accusation do you think is closer to the truth? That it's Parliament versus people, or that the English working class are all Nazis? Okay, I know who's going to win that one. So what you're seeing is genuine panic in the benches of the Parliament, because these people have been used to winning and not even have any opposition for decades, and now it doesn't work anymore. So what did they do? They went in, and there's some spines showing up in the Tory party, which is a surprise to me. Cox was excellent. They dragged everyone back into Parliament for a beat up the government day, and what happened? They lost hopelessly all day long. It just went on and on and on. Every session they lost and they lost and they lost. You could see the Speaker Bercow's face towards the end of it. He was not a happy bunny about how this was going down, and he couldn't do anything about it because he kept losing. So what happened the next day? Oh, the language was terrible. So they doubled down and they tried to go in language. Right? Now, this isn't going well. This isn't playing well. I've got one example here. So the Labour Party said, oh, the language is terrible. Boris said humbug. Oh, my ears. Oh, right. You know, they have an attack of the vapours. It's smelling salts time. He said humbug. He said surrender bill. Oh, the tragedy. This is causing death threats, right? This is what they're saying. Okay. Let me give you an example. I'll clean it up a little bit because it's a UK call. This is Neil Coyle, Bermondsey and Old Southwark MP, Labour, writing in public on Twitter to Piers Morgan. It's early doors, Piers, he says, but I say this hand on heart. Go F yourself. You're a waste of space, air and skin. Trying to use Joe against us while encouraging the fascists is shocking even for a scrote like you. You make me sick. So that's the kind of gentler politics right there. So these people said, oh, the language you said humbug. Right? And the people are going, yeah, he said humbug because it was humbug. It's not working. It's on one level, it is profoundly comedic. I have to say, I've laughed a lot in the last 3 or 4 days. It has been hilarious. On a deeper level, what we're seeing is They attempt to tell the British people that they're not worth being a people, that they should subsume themselves into the European empire. They should no longer have any pride in themselves as a nation, is failing. And it's failing in lots of little towns and cities all around this country where people are saying, no, I don't consent to my mind being occupied in this way.
Okay.
David, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Right, let's move on, David, because you've been in communication with the UK Supreme Court Press Office. Now, I have to say that Geoffrey Cox was absolutely determined to press home the idea that the Supreme Court judges were independent. This was probably the only thing I couldn't quite agree with him on, because there are definitely some questions that need to be asked about this. So, first of all, you asked, I note, this is your email to them. You said, I know Twitter is discussing a comment posted in the Law Gazette as follows: 9 out of the 11 justices receive stipends of £175,000 plus from the EU, and the Supreme Court itself is a member of a network of presidents of the Supreme Judicial Courts of the EU. Can you confirm whether and to what extent this is accurate? And they wrote back to say to you, I can confirm that the court is a member of the network of presidents of Supreme Courts of the EU. None of the justices now sits in European courts. The justices are paid by the UK Supreme Court. So you then asked, I have a follow-up question, how many of the justices formerly sat in European courts? And they didn't know the answer to that. That's something I'll need to ask the individual justices, they said, and they are currently in recess. How convenient. Is that because they ran away to avoid the blowback from this judgment? But anyway, it goes on. I will email out to them as soon as, I will email out to them, but you will need to bear with me for the answer, I'm afraid. So then you also ask, can we have the information in the form of, the dates upon which each judge sat for the EU, and 2, how much they were paid? And the answer from the press office was, I'll ask that as a follow-up when I get the responses, although they may not have that info to hand. So, what are your thoughts on that then?
Well, one thing, in Scotland, we are trying and failing to get a register of judicial interests, because we want to know the financial interests that might influence a judge in any given situation, and we want it to be in the open. Seems that we have the same problem with the Supreme Court, because certainly their own staff, who were very helpful, I'd have to say, didn't know any of the answers. So it would be quite good to know if some of these judges had, in fact, a long history of working in European institutions, for example. And that should, I think, have been declared if it was the case. It seems relevant to me.
Absolutely.
Certainly think it should. Well, we did a little bit of extra research on your work, and here we're having a look at the network of the presidents of the Supreme Judicial Courts of the European Union. So if you're in the network, you're in. It says the presidents of the Supreme Judicial Courts of the member states of the European Union decided to form an association whose constituent assembly was held on March the 10th, 2004 at the French court, with the financial support of the European Commission. So this body has been funded by the EU. That was not declared up front, so there's a lot of questions to be asked. This is the list of the nation states involved. There's UK right at the end. But what was interesting is that the EU's own documentation gave quite a deep look into what the UK Supreme Court does. So you can again freeze your screens and have a look at this. It shows the criminal, civil and family responsibilities of the Supreme Court. But this is the bit I alluded to earlier. It's got a big caveat on the bottom saying how important it is that the Supreme Court decides devolution issues. And of course, this is the EU at work inside the Constitution of the UK. This was also interesting because I found at the end of one of their pages a little bit about how the justices are appointed in the UK system. To make that a bit easier, this is it. So the Supreme Court produces an appointments committee that's got the Supreme Court of Justice, President and the Deputy President, and then they take a member from the three judicial appointments commissions, that's England and Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, so one from each of those plus those other two, the President and the Deputy President, and they make a recommendation to the Lord Chancellor, who talks to the Prime Minister, and then if they're happy it's put to the monarch. So that's how the system works, but of course Lord Chancellor is Privy Council. Who produces the list that they look at of candidates? We've no idea. It's all a bit incestuous. And David, you were absolutely right, because if we look at the judicial appointments committees themselves, they come out of the Constitutional Reform Act 2005, which claims that it enshrined in law the independence of the judiciary and changed the way judges are appointed. I have to be very cynical, because every time we see them use this sort of language, they're doing the opposite.
Absolutely. Now, David, the question is, what's going to happen with Boris? Boris could go to jail if he refuses to ask for an extension to Brexit negotiations, according to a senior judge. How far is the judiciary going to go to interfere with how the country is run?
This is a fascinating question, and you can trust the Independent to take an extreme line on anything. So just let's imagine how this plays out. Okay, the Prime Minister of the country says, "I'm going to follow the expressed will of the people of the country," and then the Parliament and specifically the judges conspire to have him arrested and locked up. Quote, at Her Majesty's pleasure. How does that work? Have we got any sort of constitution? Have we got any rule of law left? Now, if I was Boris, I don't know how determined Boris is to actually get a proper Brexit, and that's another question. But if let's imagine he was. Let's imagine he's been on the road to Damascus, he's seen the light, and he thinks, actually, we need properly out of Europe. And he's just about to talk about military unification, really. And someone threatens him with jail. The response is, surely, knock yourself out. Can you imagine how much this country would love someone, love them, if they were prepared to sacrifice something for this nation like that? It's a very strange threat. It's a bizarre threat to make. That it's quite clear that the people making it are willing to trash everything in this country in order to stay in the EU. They're willing to sacrifice it all.
Well, of course, because let's face it, membership of the EU represents the end of a nation state anyway. So they haven't really got anything to lose by doing that. But let's look at this now. This was on Guido Fawkes this morning. Did Carl Turner threaten Dominic Cummings? Is the headline. Did Carl Turner threaten Cummings? Now, Carl Turner, Labour Party MP, and this includes a piece of video footage from the BBC, and they're asking the question, did he threaten Cummings? Now, this is quite difficult to listen to because of the background noise. I've done as much as I can to clean that up, but you need to listen very, very carefully to what is said here, and particularly watch the subtitles if you're watching this on video. Sorry, let me just get this. There we go. So have a look at this.
It's Dominic Cummings.
That tone of language is going down well, Dominic. That tone of language the Prime Minister is using is going down well in constituencies like mine. I've had death threats overnight. Should be dead. It's a disgrace. I've got Brexit. I've had 3 opportunities to get Brexit to Labour PSD. And if I could have voted for it, I would have voted for it. Don't tell me to get Brexit done. The Prime Minister should be there negotiating a deal to bring back for me to support. Don't tell me to get Brexit done. The tone of your language has been appalling. Really, really dreadful. It's very, very dreadful. And people are threatening you. Am I really deep?
So I don't know if you were able to hear that, but at the end, after the subtitles had stopped, Carl Turner can be very clearly heard saying, "In a ditch, dead." And Guido Fawkes asking the question, was that a threat? Now, Carl Turner is claiming that he was in receipt of death threats. So what actually has happened here is that he is quoting the death threat that he claims that he has received. And he claims that he received this death threat on a Facebook group run by an organization, well, a group called Yellow Vest Hull. So here we have the implication that the death threat has come from some right-wing extremist group that happened to be wearing yellow vests in Hull. And of course, that's not really what happened, is it? He's being a little bit disingenuous because, of course, any comment that Yellow Vest Hull made was sort of referencing the comment that Boris Johnson had made about himself, preferring to be lying dead in a ditch rather than extending Article 50. So it wasn't a death threat at all. Now, Yellow Vest Hull have made a statement, which Hull Live have put out this morning on their website. And it says here, Hull members of political movement Yellow Vest Hull have spoken out after they were accused of sending Hull East MP Carl Turner death threats. We wish to make it clear that no death threats have been made against Carl Turner, they said, using our page group. And we believe that Mr. Turner is using this for political traction. If such threats were made, the police would have been involved, and we would expect the culprit to be prosecuted and charged with the full force of the law. It is not something that we would allow or tolerate. We're a group of 1,000 normal, hard-working people from Hull who collectively are fighting to get our voices heard when our MP refuses to listen. So this, it seems to me, is absolute, as they say, political posturing by Mr. Turner. And in the meantime, we have other headlines. Yvette Cooper's daughter says she is scared in plead MP. And here's the Sun saying, man arrested for breaking into office of Jess Phillips MP and screaming fascist after she called on Boris Johnson to apologise for Joe Cox comments during Commons clash. So, David, it seems that, we have the media. If we look at what the BBC did particularly, they stopped the subtitles at a particularly interesting point in that conversation. It seemed to me that that what they were aiming to do there was to cause people to question, and to raise people's anger levels by questioning whether the MP, Carl Turner, had made a threat against Dominic Cummings. Because frankly, Dominic Cummings, during that video clip, was standing right beside a Channel 4 journalist, and it wouldn't have taken the BBC very much to find out exactly what Carl Turner had said there and include that as a subtitle. So I can't see that that was anything other than an intentional decision not to subtitle that particular section of the video.
So you're suggesting there that that's all about raising the temperature. I certainly think that there's going to be a huge attention on any minor shoutiness that goes on the side of pro-Brexit will be essentially portrayed as something akin to terrorism. Meanwhile, people carrying banners talking about Tory scum and hanging effigies, they'll be fine because that's the direction of travel that's desired. But again, you see the people of Hull fighting back to get their voices heard. They're doing so standing on the law. They're doing so with respect for the law. And this is excellent. So good on them.
Absolutely. We'll keep going. We're out of time, but we'll keep going, Brian. I think
we need to keep going on this subject. So
okay. So you asked what is Boris genuine with respect to Brexit? Well, I'm going to say I don't think so entirely, but we'll explain why in a second. We've headlined this particular graphic "A Deal Reformed," so I'm going to propose a potential scenario for how we move forward from here. Of course, Parliament has been unprorogued. That's already been done. Boris is bound by legislation to ask for an extension of Article 50. So he has to write, if he comes back from the European Council meeting on the 18th of October, he has to write on the 19th to the European Council and ask them to extend Article 50 until the 31st of January. But it's interesting that over the last few days, week or two, he met Leo Varadkar, he's met Juncker, he's met Tusk, he's met a bunch of other EU leaders, and he has preempted this letter by telling them that he does not want any extension. He wants to get on with Brexit. They need to leave with a deal, and so they should not extend Article 50. So I think that what is going to happen is the EU is going to reject this extension request, which Boris is going to be forced to make. I think that's absolutely on the cards, and therefore it's checkmate for Parliament, because at that point Parliament is stuffed. They cannot move because they are saying that you may not leave on the 31st of October without a deal, but they've steadfastly refused to vote for the only deal that's on the table at the moment, which is Theresa May's deal. So checkmate for Parliament. They then have to decide what they do, because they're only going to have a matter of days to do it, and no deal is not an option. So I believe that this means the return of the Cameron-May deal. Now I'm calling it the Cameron-May deal. I'll explain that in a second. There's no other alternative at this point. So what do we mean by the Cameron-May deal? Well, to understand that, we've got to go back to Cameron's deal of February 2016. This resulted from 18 months of David Cameron running around Europe, speaking to EU leaders. It was a legally binding agreement, and it formed the basis of David Cameron's campaign on his side of the argument running up to the referendum in 2016. And the document was called The Best of Both Worlds, the United Kingdom's Special Status in a Reformed European Union. It was very clear that we would be in the parts of Europe that work for us, but we would be out of the parts of Europe that do not work for us. And I have been arguing for 3 years now that this is pretty much exactly Theresa May's position, except that she's from the opposite point of view, that we are out of the European Union, but that we opt into the institutions that we want to be in. And with respect to security and defence, Cameron's deal is quite clear. He says the ability to take action and keep our people safe. So we must remain and maintain the ability to take action collectively and keep our people safe. And Theresa May was absolutely clear about this over the last couple of years as well. And because each one of us is made safer by the close security cooperation between the UK and the EU, we all need a deal that keeps that close partnership intact. And this deal does that too. So that's Theresa May's deal. And my argument, therefore, is that, you know, from a greater distance, there is no difference between them. Cameron's position was remain, but opt out of institutions you don't like. And I'm saying that equals leave, but opt in to institutions you do like. And the other key part of this, of course, is that Cameron's document was talking about a reformed European Union. And if we want to consider reformed European unions, we've got to consider Guy Verhofstadt. So just remind ourselves, this wasn't part of the clip that I showed before on this programme, but Guy Verhofstadt speaking at the Liberal Democrat conference. And think about this.
So let us use this pro-European energy, not only to remain, I have to tell you, in Europe, but also to reform the European Union. Because I have one conviction. That Brexit happens is also a sign that this European Union needs to be modernized, needs to be more effective. We cannot continue, dear friends, with a Europe that is always acting too little and too late.
So this is not reform. David Cameron was not talking about reform, in my opinion, in the sense that many, many people would view reform of the European Union, because the European Union is too big, it's too heavy bureaucracy, it's corrupt, it's a gravy train for people. That's what most people imagine when they think of reform of the European Union. No, we're talking about reforming the European Union into an EU military empire.
Their words. The empire is their words. The military union's coming.
Absolutely. Guy Verhofstadt's words as well. And if anybody's in any doubt about this and the way things are going in Europe, just consider this tweet from one of the German state broadcasters, radio broadcasters. Well, what is it? It's in German, obviously. What's it saying? It's saying anyone who denigrates the EU flag or anthem should be able to be fined or imprisoned for 3 years. That has now been decided in the Bundesrat, which is the German equivalent of the House of Lords, and the bill now goes to the Bundestag, which is the German equivalent of the House of Commons. This is the direction of travel in Europe. They are building an empire which you cannot criticise. And I have to say that even the Brexit Party is getting interested in this situation that we find ourselves and the potential that Boris Johnson intends to bring back Theresa May's deal, which I'm arguing is also David Cameron's deal. And for the first time, we have Nigel Farage. Actually, if you go and find this this little video clip, which I have heavily edited here, Nigel Farage using the correct language with respect to EU defence. It also signs us up to EU military, is how he's describing it for the first time, really. So maybe we're seeing some movement in the direction of the Brexit Party as well. But David, I'm interested in your thoughts on that and whether you're prepared to agree with this as being a potential scenario for the next few weeks.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, there's never been any real sign that on substantive issues which are discussed in detail, that Boris is talking about what we would term an independence position. He's talking about a deal, and it's not at all clear what deal means. If it doesn't mean something very similar to the May deal, which was a complete sellout and betrayal of Brexit, and it was Brexit without the exit. It was worse than being in. Farage said that he's correct. And if it doesn't mean that, then there's no chance of getting it. So there's only two possibilities. There's a possibility you've outlined, and there's a possibility that the talk of a deal is simply window dressing, and that we're leaving on the 31st without a deal. Now, Cummings is saying for sure we're leaving on the 31st, and this is all according to plan. The difficulty we have is none of us actually know what the plan is, right? Because there's been shuffling at the top. We understood where the plan was with Theresa May, right? It was Brexit without the exit. We don't really see clearly if there's been a change here. There have been some changes at the top, and perhaps the plan is something else now. But if it is, we don't know about it.
Thoughts?
Well, it's in an immense state of flux. I think we've covered most of the key issues. Where are we now? I think what we've got to say is, can people do something about what's happening? And I think they can. They've got to get stuck into their MPs. They've got to get the pressure on. The calmer, the more reasonable, but the more persistent they are, the stronger the case. It's now up to the nation itself to stand up and drive this agenda. Parliament is, somebody said in our chat box, nailed to the perch. So it's up to the people to do something about it. But do I trust any of them? No. No. Okay. Well, look, we're over time, but we've just got a couple of more non-Brexit related issues to discuss briefly. David, an update on Stefan Sutherland case.
Well, yes, I just want to highlight that the BBC are covering this today. The quote, Sandy Sutherland, I think her family is resilient, and that's for sure. And 6 years into this, we still have the backing of the community. We're not going to give up. No one deserves to have their life cut short when they've got so much ahead of them. And then we've got the weak response from the police. Police Scotland said it arranged to meet Mr. Sutherland's family. Detective Superintendent Graham Mackey said, as such, it would be inappropriate to discuss the case further before we've had the opportunity to meet with the family. After 6 years, right, I think they've had more than enough opportunity to meet with the family. But anyway, we're not talking till we meet with the family. However, he continues, however, I would say that we'll continue to act on any new information which is reported to Police Scotland in connection with Stefan's death. I would ask that if anyone has information who never came forward at any time for any reason, please contact the police. Now, of course, we know from previous reports that some 30 witnesses came forward and were effectively silenced by the police, and something that Mr. Mackey of Police Scotland doesn't seem to have read in the newspapers. So that's not very convincing, but it shows that there is growing attention on this case. It's now been reported in the BBC. Police Scotland are at least having to make some moves towards the family. The family have asked for the body to be exhumed and for a proper murder investigation, and we'll watch this closely as it develops.
Yeah, very, very serious stuff, David, because if people are being murdered and the police are covering up and blocking proper investigation, we are indeed in a lawless state. You're reporting from Scotland, but of course we know that equivalent things are going on south of the border, and one of the key issues at the moment is that many of Britain's police forces will not investigate the deaths of children. But more on that in due course. The Department of Education is also not going to look after the safety of our children. And just wanted to end on this remarkable exchange between the UK column and the Department of Education. We recently asked them what their policy was on the organisation Extinction Rebellion, because Extinction Rebellion has said in its own documentation it's calling for people to break the law. That includes young adults. It also includes children, i.e. those under the age of 16. The BBC has reported this state of affairs as well. So we emailed the Department of Education and asked them a key question about this. This was the question. Against this background, that is that Extinction Rebellion is calling for adults and children to break the law, and the Department of Education's strong lead in working to prevent radicalisation of school children, please can you explain the Department of Education's official policy with regard to Extinction Rebellion and its attempts to coerce children and young people to break the law and indeed absent themselves from schools? Thank you for your assistance. So that's what we sent to them. Their response was remarkable. Here it is. This is what they said. We share the passion young people and others have for tackling climate change. We are recognised at home and abroad for our world-leading action as the first major economy to legislate for net zero emissions, and as nominated hosts for next year's crucial climate talks that will help us shape the climate agenda. And just today, we've helped to secure enough clean energy to power 7 million homes. For the first time, young people are also shaping our future climate policy through the government's Youth Steering Group. We encourage constructive engagement on the issue of climate change, which doesn't come at the expense of our children's education or excessive disruption. So basically, they simply sidestepped the question. They did not give their policy on Extinction Rebellion and its blatant call for children and others to break the law. They did not respond on the radicalisation and safety of school children. This was a whitewash, just incredible. Who is in charge of the organisation? Well, Gavin Williamson at the moment is the main man. He's honoured to be appointed Secretary of State for Education. This other man needs looking at closely, Jonathan Slater. He's more interested in promoting the LGBT++ agenda. And we'll leave you with this thought. This is the Department of Education's own document saying it's the duty of everybody, particularly from the 1st of July 2015, all schools are required to be working to adhere to the prevent policy to prevent the radicalisation of youngsters. But we now have an organisation called Extinction Rebellion, which is allowed to call for children to break the law during meetings in local schools. And if anybody wants to know the background to that particular comment, well, of course, we know that they've been doing this at schools in Totnes, Devon, and we can be sure that that's been repeated across the country. So, David, a very interesting little organisation. It can openly call for people to break the law. It can threaten to destroy airliners with drones, and it can then hold its meetings in schools and ask for the children to get involved. and the Department of Education protects them. How could that be?
Yes, well, it seems the Department of Education has fallen. It's fallen for the climate scam. It's part of the policy of terrifying the children and making them think the world is about to end. And they seem to be entirely on board with that. I looked at the Extinction Rebellion site today, and it was giving advice to people on what happens when you get arrested on Extinction Rebellion demonstrations. So it's clearly involved in law breaking and preparing people for incarceration.
Indeed. Well, we just end on a positive note because it's been a fairly hard-hitting UK column. The enjoyment that we get out of simply calling these government departments and asking them simple questions very politely is tremendous, because they become so wobbly so quickly. And we say to our audience today that if we can make these phone calls, we can send the emails, we can challenge these individuals, of course, so can you. And what we really need now in the country is for many, many more people to be standing up, to be counted. That's what assists the process.
David has one more comment, I think.
I would just like to thank the person in the chat room who said that Parliament's nailed to the perch. I would also say that quite clearly Parliament is pining for the fjords.
Indeed, and I think we must end on the fact that there is now a petition for an election. When that reaches over 100,000, it would be remarkable to have Parliament ignore a petition for an election. So you might have a look at that. Can you give us any more details where people can go for that, David?
Not just yet. I think it's coming through the admin system in the Parliament. So as soon as we have anything on that, I'll put it out via Twitter.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the positive comments in the chat box. Thank you very much to everybody supporting UK Column. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider taking out a subscription and or making a donation. We can only do this with your continued financial help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.